Back in Generation 5, Dragon types were the undisputed kings of the OU metagame. With base 140 special attack Draco Meteors flying around from threats like Latios, Hydreigon, and Kyurem, very few Pokemon could afford to take a hit if they weren't Steel type. And back then, Steel types were the only resistant to dragons. No Fairy types had balanced things out yet. The era was dominated by raw power and limited answers. Then came Gen 6, the introduction of Fairy types. This flipped the meta on its head. Pokemon like Clefable, Azumarill, and Megamile gave teams some much needed ways to counteract Dragon types, and from that point on, Dragon types had to take a back seat, at least for a while. But, why am I bringing this up now? Because in Gen 9, I genuinely feel like Dragon types are making a serious comeback. To start off, let's talk about the new Dragon type Pokemon that have been added in Generation 9. We've got Excalibur, the pseudo-legendary of the Paldean region, an absolute mess with great stats that has access to Glade Rush as well. Then there's the Gouging Fire, Roaring Moon, Walking Wake, and Raging Bolt that are all photosynthesis mons that get enhanced by their powers in the sun or even with a booster energy boost. Next is the Rain Menace for Archaludon, which has the Dragon Steel sniping with good offensive utility with Electro Shot, stamina boosts from taking damage, and overall just becoming a great rain abuser. Now we can move on to the returning dragons from the previous generation and Pokemon Home. We got Kyurem, Dragapult, Garchomp, Latios, and Latias. That total brings us the number of dragon types in OU to about 12, and we can say that's how interesting how dominant some of these are in the OU metagame. Of these 12, 5 dragons have been already banned or suspected. Excalibur, Gouging Fire, Roaring Moon, Kyurem, and Archaludon. That's nearly half of the dragons in the tier being considered too strong for OU. Even more striking, 4 out of the 6 of the newly introduced dragon types in Generation 9, Excalibur, Gouging Fire, Roaring Moon, and Archaludon, have already been banned or at least heavily suspected. So what's going on here? Why are dragon types suddenly breaking the metagame again? The answer lies likely in power creep. Many of the new dragons come with insane stat spreads, signature moves, and powerful abilities, also including min-maxed stats as well. When you combine that with flexibility of Terastallization, which lets dragons patch up their weakness and even supercharge their offenses, you get a recipe of something truly overwhelming. It's almost like Game Freak wanted to bring back the Gen 5 era where dragons were broken. And honestly, they've kind of succeeded. With all the new items, with all the new abilities, and with all the new moves, dragon types have been soaring to Generation 9 in the Generation 9 metagame, causing them to be problematic in general. To give you an example of items, we can talk about items. Booster Energy, which is very controversial in this generation. Booster Energy boosts the best stat for the Pokemon that is using it with the photosynthesis, causing the entire metagame to be unstable in that sense, giving the best stat of that Pokemon a boost. This is usually paired with offensive capabilities with Dragon Dance, Calm Mind, or even just attacking with raw power. Examples for this are Calm Mind, Raging Bolt, there's Dragon Dance, Gouging Fire, Dragon Dance, Roaring Moon, and we even have the offensive threat of Walking Wake with Choice Specs. So why am I saying these Pokemon and why am I listing them? It just overall shows you how offensively threatening these guys can be with their setup moves, or their raw damage, or even in general their raw capabilities with their entitled items and with their base stats as well. So next we can talk about is their moves, which have been buffed and been crazy since Generation 9 has started. We have Glade Rush, 120 base power, Dragon Stab on Excalibur, which is crazy to even say. We had Electro Shot on Archaludon, which is insane. We had Walking Wake in the sun, being able to use a water type move, which is insane as well. It gets a boost in the sun too, right? And it just gets crazier. You can't really prepare your teams for these type of crazy moves. Of course you can. You can always build around your team around this, but there's always going to be a weaker crazier offensive threat, a dragon specifically, that can just muscle past your team. So you might think like, oh, you can easily just run a steel type or a fairy type to counteract these dragons, but can you give me an example of a Pokemon that completely counteracts these dragons that are steel or fairy? Right? Let's think about them. I'm gonna search them up on Showdown at the same time to list them. The best steel types in the OU tier right now are essentially Goldengo, Corviknight, Iron Treads, King Gambit, and Tinkaton. These mons can be used offensively and defensively. We can talk about the defensive ones first. For Iron Treads is one of the best it's not one of the best, but it is a good utility mon that is run in the tier. King Gambit is one of the best offensive threats for steel types, and Tankaton is one of the best defensive utility sets as well. Also, Corviknight as well, which also does help with steel types as well. But all these mons can have a weakness against these dragon types sometimes. So say if you run into a Dragonite and you're in the situation where you have a Corviknight, you're like, okay, let me just go my Corv and I'll be able to phase out the Dragonite. But Dragonite actually has a possibility of being Corviknight 1-on-1. Corviknight has can usually body press, and that's the entire game plan of the Corviknight user. But with Dragonite, it can use Encore. There's so much capabilities. There's Fire Punch. There's a lot of viable movesets that Dragonite's been running just to beat these type of checks. So it comes down to the point where it just becomes they're not really checks anymore. It's just like they're just kind of there, just phasing out your Pokemon, but they're not even phasing out your Pokemon. They're getting bullied by the Dragon types in the tier. Another thing about Fairy types we can talk about is what Fairy types do we have that are defensive anymore? Like if you look at the generation for Fairy types right now, we don't really have the best bulky Fairy types anymore. Like Clefable is good, but it cannot take at least 3 hits anymore. Before in generation 7 or 8, Clefable would take nothing from any damage, but now with the booster energy and even these crazy boosts onto your dragon types, Clefable just takes 2 hits and gets 2-shot in general. Plus Tera, like dragon types with Tera to become a huge problem. Because say you do bring your fairy type or your steel type in, you want to 1v1 that dragon, they can just tear out of that weakness, and your fairy type's in a shitty position. Depending on the Tera, it can be a devastating blow to your entire team. So what can we do offensively? What can you do, and what can you do in general? It just becomes a whole waiting game for that dragon type to come out and possibly set up, or you could either Tera back defensively. And that is a huge thing too, because using Tera on your side of the field makes you prone to losing too, because now that you use Tera, your opponent can find an easier win path just to counteract how to win. So it just becomes down to the fact that your opponent, you force Tera, your wall is chipped down, your fairy, steel, or wall type is chipped down, and it just becomes down to a patient waiting game for your opponent, right? Also, not even to mention that dragon types are also a good defensive type in the tier right now, especially with Ogerpon and Wellspring running around with Ivy, Cudgel, Play Rough, and the 4th Moosehawk can be anything, U-turn, knockoff, Play Rough. Ogerpon is one of the best wall breakers in the tier right now. But with a dragon running on your team, the metagame becomes a little more easier to check it. Right now, we actually banned Roaring Moon, which makes it feel like Ogerpon's a little more broken right now. But with another dragon type that we can use is Dragonite that actually has a chance of setting up on Ogerpon, or even Kira to set up on Ogerpon. We have ways to counteract this. We also use Dragapult. Dragapult is one of the best ways to counter Ogerpon, actually. Essentially, if you know what the Ogerpon's coverage is, you can switch in Dragapult once on Ogerpon, you turn out, do 60% or 50% damage to the Ogerpon, and everything in this generation, chip is chip. You need chip to make progress in this generation. So overall, chipping out the Ogerpon down to 60%, and you can set up hazards. Ogerpon is chipped, and that's the job done, essentially. So it's not even just the fact that offensively dragon types are amazing. Defensively, they're also amazing too. They also check a lot of mons. So it becomes a problem where you can see it's kind of flexible on both sides, So overall, I just feel like Generation 5 is Generation 9 is the new Generation 5 in that sense, where we have crazy amount of dragon types being run. We even seen people running 3 or 2 dragon types on their team because they're just so good now. It just becomes hard to check. So what can we do in this generation? Do you think it's Tera's fault? Do you think it's the new Pokemon that's been added, the new abilities, the new moves? Do you think as a player, as an enjoyer of this tier, do you think it's impossible to stabilize a tier with all these dragons? Or what do you guys think? But other than that, I'm gonna be honest, I think this is the end of the video. If you're new to the channel, hit the sub battle. I don't really usually do this type of discussions. I wanted to try something new, I wanted to see how it would go. And I hope you guys would like it. If you're new, please sub. We want to get this channel up to some crazy views. We'll see how it goes. And you know what? I'll see you guys next time. Peace.